if that's okay with everyone. No problems? Okay. So I'll start with a karakia, which is a prayer, a blessing for this space today. It's a prayer that was given to us by Te Ao Marama Apiata as a gift to the Bird Academy. Whakarongo, whakarongo, whakarongo ki ngā ha'i mano I karanga nai, tui, tui, tuia. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ti here ngā tangata katoa, ti hei uri uri, ti hei nako nako, ti hei Māori ora. And the English translation of that is listen, listen, listen to the many voices that are calling. So bind, weave, bind from above, from below, from without, and bind to self. Weave the bonds of the people, carry out ascendance, let them adorn us. It's the breath of life. And alludes to the Māori name given to the Bird Academy, ha'i mano, which means listen really well to the thousands for the purposes of really hearing what they're saying. So it's a huge pleasure to welcome the New Zealand Spinal Cord Injury Registry team here today to this Bird Academy presentation. Research forum presentation. I will let them tell you more about who they are, but the Bird Academy had the privilege of working alongside the registry over this some months this year to help them think about which data points they might want to continue gathering and sort of just refine the data points that they are gathering. And as part of that, I recognised that they were doing this, amazing work, and we were really keen to support them to share the work that they are doing and the data that's been collected, and hopefully inspire us all to think about the ways that we could make use of this great data, so that in the end, the people who experience spinal cord injury are able to make sure that their needs and preferences are met. And I just want to take a moment to honour Richard Smale, because Richard Smale was hugely influential in setting up or saying there was a need for this registry, and for saying that the voices and perspectives of disabled people, people who experience spinal cord injury, need to be prominent and prioritised within the collection of data. So I just want to honour Richard today for his incredible advocacy on behalf of people with spinal cord injury around New Zealand and internationally.
Thanks, Rochelle, that's great.
So I'll just introduce Tracey and Greta to you, who are going to be doing the presentations. Tracey is a physio. She's been at the Burwood Spinal Unit Christchurch for over 22 years. Doesn't look it. She was a rehab physiotherapist from 2001 to 2016, and her master's came about following the 2014-15 registry pilot study, looking at clinicians' perceptions, influences and barriers to entering data. And she's been the Burwood Spinal Unit Registry Coordinator since its launch in August 2016. And also a real pleasure to introduce Greta to you. Greta Minty is also a physio. She works at the Auckland Spinal Unit, and she started working there on her return from the UK in 2012. Greta's moved into the registry coordinator role in 2020 as she was looking for a change from clinical work, but she remains really passionate about the welfare of people who've sustained spinal cord injury. So welcome, lovely to have you here. What we'll do is Greta and Tracey are going to do the presentation. There will be opportunities for discussion and for interaction. If there's something that you want to remember or you want to ask so that Greta and Tracey have got a moment to think about it, feel free to add it into the chat and we'll make sure that that gets included as part of the discussion. But we'll start with the presentation by Tracey and Greta. So just when you're ready, Tracey, if you're happy to share the recording.
All good. Okay, is that up and...
Yep, it looks perfect. Thank you.
All good. Thanks for that introduction. So yeah, Greta and I are just going to whip through this together. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Tracey taku ingoa. So my name is Tracey, and as Rochelle says, I've been here for a while. And Greta my partner in crime in Auckland, is here today. And I think, Greta, you're just going to start off by going through this.
Here we are. Hi, everyone. Kia ora. Thanks for joining us today. So, yeah, since the inception of the registry in 2016, we've had funding for each site to have a coordinator working 0.5 at each of the sites. So Tracey, as Rochelle mentioned, has been there since the very beginning and did the pilot, and I came on board in 2020. Recently, very excitingly, we have had our funding increased. So we've now got funding for a full-time position at each site, which is amazing. So we've had Maria Donaldson join our team. So Maria works 0.4 in Christchurch. She's an OT by background and has quite a lot of management experience in the OT field. And then Christine very recently came on board, so she's been with us maybe about 3 months in Auckland. So Christine's got, again, physio background, but she's been working with the Auckland Stroke research team for about the last 10 years. So bringing a lot of research experience with her. So amazing to have a full team.
Excellent. All good. So I'm just going to quickly whip through the outline of what we're going to discuss today. Just going to go over the background of the registry, how it came about. Greta's going to whip through how it works. And then we're going to look at our Tertility obligations, what's collected, how our data is being used and our kind of ideas for being used, showing some of our annual reports in our website, and also looking at the data access processes, so how people can get the data. I'm also going to give you a quick rundown on the dashboards that we have, which is kind of an interactive platform that we use readily for looking at our data, analysing our data, sharing our data, and also cleaning our data. So a very powerful tool that we have available to us. So if we look at our background, a registry has been talked about in New Zealand for many, many years. And Richard was one of those who talked about it. Andrew Hall, who I think is on the call, has also been involved for many, many years looking at getting a registry established. I think it was back in 1968 that Bill Utley discussed the importance of having a registry. So it's been a long time coming. Finally, in 2014, there was an action plan released from ACC here in New Zealand that basically had a 5-year plan, and as one of those objectives was to establish a registry. So that meant that there was funding available. Which was rather exciting. We then looked at doing a pilot study, and I see David's online as well. Welcome, David. So we did a pilot study looking at 2 different registries. So we looked at the Melbourne Spinal Care, and we looked at the Canadian Rick Hansen Spinal Cord Injury Registry. And we looked at those over a year. We looked at what they were collecting, the platforms, their uses, etc. And at the end of that, we had decided to go with a partnership with Rick Hansen Institute. So the Canadian, there was a few reasons around that. They'd been established for about 10 years and had really good platform in place. So basically we were piggybacking onto the back of their already existing registry with a wee bit of a Kiwi spin. So we started our data collection on the 1st of August 2016, and that was a lot of work to get to that point. And we have a governance group which leads the registry. So we in New Zealand, we have 2 spinal services, one in Auckland and one in Christchurch. And the governance group consists of consumers, clinicians, service leaders, ACC, Praxis, and researchers. So it's a group of people who have a big interest in the registry, and they are the ones that help guide the registry and its development.
So how does it work? So essentially anyone who has a new spinal cord injury or cauda injury since August 2016 and are admitted to either of the supraspinal services, so that's Middlemore Hospital, Auckland Spinal Unit, Christchurch Hospital, or Burwood Spinal Unit, will be registered on the registry. At that point, they'll either have a minimal, so everyone has a minimal data set collected, but we do approach people to try and get consent for full data set collection. So we're an opt-in registry. So anyone that fits our inclusion criteria, so they have to be a New Zealand citizen or resident to get that full data set collection. In our policy, it does say they need to be able to speak English or be able to have the information translated to them. They will be approached for consent for a full data set collection. So we're collecting data through their whole journey, so from acute through the rehab phase. So that's a lot of the work is done through the clinicians working with the people that have consented, so from medical notes, outcome measures, things like that, and us as coordinators approach and do a couple of interviews to get some demographic information, and also just to get some information about complications and services that they've had involved in their care at discharge. We also try and follow people into the community. So we touch base with them at 18 months and then every 5 years. Well, that's the ideal. That's what we're working towards. And we do that by sending out or emailing out a questionnaire for them to complete. We do actually have a couple of other data collection points. So we've just started a community opt-in option. So that's people that have sustained their spinal cord injury prior to the commencement of the registry can actually opt in. They have a minimal data set collected, and then they will slot into the time frame for the community follow-up if they're happy to do so. And we've also got a historical minimal data set from 2007 to 2016, which the paper was written on.
Thanks, Greta.
So Tertility obligations. So when Tracey and I were doing some work and digging through the data, it sort of became apparent that we had a high incidence of Māori having spinal cord injuries, especially traumatic spinal cord injuries. So we've got 50 per million compared Māori having spinal cord injuries compared to 36 million per million, Europeans. Unfortunately, alongside this, it became apparent that we had lower consent rates in this population. So, you know, we had minimal data sets on a lot of people, but we weren't getting that full comprehensive picture of their journey. So we took it out upon ourselves to try and improve this. So it's been quite a journey, and I'd say we're still sort of quite in early stages of the journey, but some of the steps that we've taken, so we've had all our patient information booklets translated into Te Reo, so that is an option for those that would prefer to receive the information in their native tongue. We've also had quite a few consultation meetings with Māori advisors at our respective DHBs, as well as meeting and establishing a relationship with Te Ao Marama Aotearoa, or Tama for short, which is an amazing group of people, Māori people living with disabilities in New Zealand. So they've given us a lot of guidance and advice. And we're also in the process of creating a Māori advisory committee, which will run alongside our governance group and consult on different aspects of the registry, just to make sure that we are meeting our Tertility obligations. So we've just got a little slide of our translated information booklet. So obviously we've done Māori, but we've also had it translated into Samoan, Simple Chinese, and Tongan. Tracey, have we had Tongan?
No, just
the three. Just the three.
Currently. Yeah. Cool. So in terms of what we collect at the registry, as Greta was saying, we have a minimal data set versus a full data set. A minimal data set is quite basic. So we're looking at things like age, gender, ethnicity, looking at the dates of admission and discharge to facilities, and the cause of the spinal cord impairment, looking at ages are collected as well, so level and scores, and whether or not they've had surgery or not. So it's quite a basic data set. However, if they consent, we have a full data set, and that currently is over 200 data points. And as Rochelle mentioned at the beginning, we are in the process of doing a data point review, looking at those data points, seeing what's been used, what hasn't been used, and what we're missing. So at this point in time, these are the sorts of things that we're collecting. As Greta says, we've got lots of acute data points. So we're looking at things like dates and times of injury and emergency details, right the way through to details of the actual event, to the point where it's de-identified, so we don't put details in that are identifiable. So, you know, if it's a motor vehicle accident, we won't say exactly what happened, but if there's a rollover, for example, that will be included. So it's idea is so that it's not identifiable. We have a lot of facility discharge dates, admission discharge dates, demographic information, socioeconomic details as well, medical history from the medical team, and interventions, so things like whether or not they had traction, whether they had surgery, whether they had a tracheostomy, and quite detailed surgical information in terms of from time of injury to time to decompression, which is one of the big things that ACC is interested in. So showing that we are getting people to the right place at the right time. SCIM scores, it's an outcome measure that we use. It's the spinal cord injury independence measure, and that is basically completed by the nurses, the physios and the OTs, and that looks at things like functional outcomes, so things like including bladder and bowel, but also things like transfers, walking ability, or pushing ability. Those sorts of things are all included in the SCIM scores. We do obviously collect the neurology data. We do collect complication rates. So we're looking at things like whether they've had a chest infection, whether they've had a PE, that sort of respiratory data, UTIs, and pressure areas. Quite a lot of detail in the pressure area section. And we complete those in the acute phase as well as the rehab phase. Urology interventions and diagnosis are also included. Physios do the respiratory and mobility sections. OTs look at equipment and activities of daily living, and nursing's the team that tend to deal with the pressure injuries and bladder and bowel. And Greta was saying we have interviews that the coordinators do. The first one's about a 5-minute chat with participants, looking at things like demographics, ethnicity, whether they're working, drinking, smoking history, that sort of thing. And on discharge, looking at things like self-efficacy, pain, services that they've used, how their bladder's being managed, those sorts of things. And then there's the community follow-up at 18 months, 5 years, 10 years. This internationally is quite a challenging area, following people into the community, and it's certainly something that we feel that we need to address. Their return rates aren't super, so that's a whole project in itself, and we're certainly looking at changing our questionnaire to make it more succinct and more applicable for the population, making sure that we have some questions that hopefully will allow us to see what our participants are finding in the community. On that, we are looking at, as part of, I can't remember whether we're going to talk about this now, Greta, but there is an interest in developing a Māori specific quality of life measure. At the moment, there isn't really one in use in New Zealand, and we have a rehab physician in Auckland who's very keen on pursuing that. In fact, is doing her PhD on it. She's just had that accepted, and she's going to develop a quality of life questionnaire. So that's quite exciting to be part of as well.
What's our data being used for? So we release an annual report at the end of each year. So far we've had 6 annual reports released. These are freely available to anyone. I think we do talk about that a little bit later. Consumers, clinicians, researchers, anyone that's looking for information, we would generally direct them to the annual reports first to see if the information was held there before coming to us for a specific data request. A couple of papers have been published using our data. So I think we mentioned earlier there's been a 10-year historical data analysis paper, and there's also been a pain paper published. We're currently just in the process of doing a 5-year report. We haven't quite decided a comparison report, so just looking to see if there are any trends or patterns throughout the years that we've been collecting the data. We haven't quite figured out if that's going to be written up as a paper or released as a report, but we're in the process of doing that, working on that at the moment. A couple of papers that have requested data for research that are underway at the moment. So one of the Auckland registrars who's rotated is looking at the incidence of pressure areas in spinal cord injury. That's a national study, and also there's a Canadian comparison paper underway. So clinicians and service audits. So Burwood Spinal Unit have done quite a few audits looking at rehab outcome measures for those with malignant neoplasms, also elderly in rehab. In Auckland, we've had a big service level audit of the acute spinal services using our data, and also we've been doing Asia's audits on Asia assessments, just making sure that they're being entered consistently and accurately into the registry, and just making sure that that's being reflected on the discharge summaries and in the patient notes. In services, conference and presentations. So we've had a lot of requests for conferences, so the orthopedic and rehab conferences, and the last ANZSCIR, we had quite a few people requesting information. So yeah, great that the data is being used.
Oh. And just to follow up on that, Greta, your website's there.
Yep. So sorry, this is where our annual reports are hosted. So the Amazing New Zealand Spinal Trust is a partnership with us. So they host a little segment for us on their website, which is fantastic. So we've got all our annual reports under a link on this page. Also general information about the spinal cord, New Zealand Spinal Cord Injury Registry. And also this is where people can come and opt in. So those community opt-in patients that we spoke about earlier, that had their injury prior to 2016 can register through the page. It's also got our details on for any queries that people might have.
Oh, sorry, a bit quick. Yes, so these are the annual reports that we've had over the years, our most recent being 2021. 2022 is imminent. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we will have a 2022 version to be able to pop up onto the Spinal Trust website, which is available there. So, okay. And these are just some of the publications when it was the publication of when we launched the registry and the 10-year report and the pain and function. And as Greta said, we've got a couple of papers that are pending.
Data use opportunities. So, sorry, I think it was Kate, you mentioned about TBI, are we collecting TBI information? So essentially we want to improve patient outcomes by informing policy planning and clinical practice. So we've been talking a little bit about the data point review that we're doing at the moment. So we're just trying to streamline our data points and make sure that we're just collecting things that are being used and that we can collect accurately. And some of our discussions that we've had with our allied health teams over this, it has been flagged, and there have been discussions in the past that, for example, TBIs is something that we're not collecting very well at all. So it's also highlighted quite big differences between the units and how we're documenting and collecting the data. You know, we've seen this as a real opportunity to potentially have discussions about changes in clinical practice and just trying to streamline what we're doing nationally and collecting traumatic brain information on concurrent spinal cord and traumatic brain injury. So again, with this, there's great opportunity for interactions between the two units. Obviously, there are only two in New Zealand, and I think traditionally we've worked in quite sort of quite silo, quite independent of each other. So I think, you know, Tracey and I and Christine and Maria working together, it does sort of bring us together, and we're hoping to have a lot more opportunity to do that with the clinical teams. So providing insight into quality improvement initiatives, and also ongoing research into spinal cord injury.
Okay, so in terms of getting access to the data, it's multi-level. So it's a good thing to understand that we do like to do the annual reports with the generic kind of group population data every year, so that it's a calendar year. So anyone who's been admitted to either of the services in a calendar year having their injury or admission to the rehab in that time frame, they will sit under 1 year. And so we can look to hopefully use this data, and annual reporting is the way that we do it regularly. But we also have our dashboards, which I will be showing you shortly, and that is aggregate data, and we make that available to services for presentation, conference use. It's just a really good way also for us as coordinators to look at our data and see what's happening, whether or not there's some issues in terms of accuracy or inputting. It's a really good way of cleaning our data and looking for outliers and things like that. But for people to get access to that, they just need to come to us, and we can provide them with that information. Depending on the level you're after, if it's just aggregate data, it's a pretty simple process, and we can build people's presentations using PowerPoint. It's a very intuitive system that we've got, and we can build according to what questions you might have or anything that you want to present on. So that's quite useful for conferences or in services. Clinicians also have access to their own identifiable data, so they can come to us and ask for a spreadsheet, and we can give them information relating to their own site data. Which is quite nice. If you're looking at doing a research project, we can do a feasibility kind of test, basically go into our dashboards and look at the questions you're wanting to answer, look at the population and say, well, you know, this is going to give you so many numbers, versus if you wanted to do it this way, it's going to be a different number again. So it just gives people the ability to kind of, in terms of building, you know, project plans and things, having those numbers to back that up. If you're looking for national identifiable data, clinicians and researchers can come to us for that, but that requires ethics approval. So if you've gone through an ethics approval process, then that is what we require for releasing identifiable data. We have had a change. So in the last few years, we've had some changes in regards to sharing our data. Initially, it was all de-identified data that we weren't able to share identifiable data. However, we've got an agreement, an MOU with St John, so is our St John Ambulance Service, who we share data with to ensure that our data is complete. So looking at time of injury and time of call, time of arrival, those sorts of data points. And they then also in return get to know which patients turn up to the spinal unit with a confirmed spinal cord injury. So it's kind of like a quality improvement process between the two of us. And that's taken some time to get sorted, to go through the whole ethics of that process. So that's a really exciting progression for us. Plus we had kind of feedback from researchers saying that it was quite challenging to get useful data out of the registry that could be matched with other data sets. Because ours was de-identified, they couldn't match, you know, an existing data set, so for comparison. So we have gone to ethics and have now got an agreement post July 2022 to release identifiable data with ethics approval, on the proviso that when the reports or the publications are done, that is at the de-identified level. So it's just changed the way that we consent people. We now let people know that identifiable data is released to those with ethical approval to have that data set. So yeah, that's kind of the levels of our data and processes. If there's anything specific you want to know, you just need to get in touch with any of the coordinators and we'll take you through which is probably the best approach for you and for your project. Obviously, a different level of sign-off is dependent on the type of data that's requested. So if we're just to show you some things that we do. So this is, as I was talking about before, PowerPoint slides for presentations. We can build these like literally in minutes, and we can do this using our data and our Clicksense platform. So if there's something in particular you're wanting to present on, this is the way that we can do it quite easily. We also have spreadsheets that we can provide to clinicians for audit purposes, and that data is obviously identifiable so that, you know, they can look at doing an audit at their site. So yeah, these dashboards, this has been a work in progress. We've really had these for the last, used them in particular the last 2-3 years. They've been built by Praxis and in Canada, and it uses the Clicksense platform, and it's Praxis is updating the platform at which our registry lives on. It is going to be called, it's currently the global research platform. It's now going to be called Praxis Connect, and it's going to integrate the Clicksense platform in it as well, which is really exciting. So it's an interactive data kind of platform that we can use for service updates, answering clinical questions, research feasibility queries, and data cleaning. And that's currently, it's a monthly download that we get from Canada, which has the most up-to-date data. So it's not live, but you'll see that once we start using it, it is, she says, give me 2 seconds. Okay, so this is Clicksense. I don't know if you can see it, it'll probably be pretty small. But just to give you an indication of the kind of things that we have available to us. So this is the platform that we use that has all our data. It's de-identified at this point, so there's no identifiable data here. And the sheets that we can show, so each of these sheets contains information based on whatever area it's grouped with. So, for example, the enrolment sheet here has the type of spinal cord injury, the facility, the reporting year, gender, age, etiology, comorbidities. Pneumonia is on the front page for some reason, and the last visit, discharge destination. So there's a whole lot of filters that are available to us here. So, for example, if someone was to come to us and to say, I want to know how many people had a fall in 2022, well, say 2021 and 2022. When you click on these, it then alters all of the data to include just those filters. So you can filter quite easily and quickly, and it gives you an indication as like, oh, okay, right, well, this is the group of people that we've got. We see that generally speaking, you can click between this to get numbers versus percentages. So that's really helpful. Great for those that don't like maths. Also lots of things that you can zoom in on. So it's a really great clinical tool to be able to look at a specific population, for example. So if we're looking at, say, falls, so we can click on the traumatic population here for 2021, 2022. You can see that falls was 43% of our population had a fall. And if you click on that even, it will give you a breakdown as to what type of fall it was. So it goes into detail whether or not it was tripping on the same level versus a metre or more. So there's the coding is detailed. It also shows you, if you're looking specifically at the age group, if you look there at the fall, if you looked at it before, you can see that shifts. So you can see this is all traumatic population, but if you're just looking at falls, you can see how that trend goes upwards towards more in the 61 to 75 and 76 age category. So it's a really intuitive kind of, it's a very good tool. It's great to be able to investigate things and to look through. I can show you some other sheets. Sankey charts, one of my favorites. And this shows where a patient goes. So looking at whether or not they were at a regional facility or not before coming in to the supraspinal facility, whether they're an acute in the spinal unit, likely only to be in Burwood, and if they've come to rehab and where they went on discharge. So it's a really nice way of being able to see a patient's journey and what the majority of people do, and to see the trends over time. The other thing to look at, potentially, you can see that there's a lot of things that we look at in terms of complications. So we're looking at here at UTIs, pulmonary conditions, broken down into pneumonia, PEs, and others. We've got pressure injuries. So if you wanted to look at, say, the population who had a pressure injury during the stay, you could click on that and then be able to know what type of participants had that. We could look at things like their Asia score to show that those with a pressure injury were more likely to be tetraplegic. They're more likely to have an Asia A rather than Asia D. So if we got rid of that and said those that didn't have a pressure area, you'll see that this will change to majority being an Asia D, and the Asia A's are less on that scale. So it's a really interactive and really fantastic way of using our data and looking at our data. And yeah, like I say, there's a range of things that we look at. We've got consent status and the reason for non-consent, for example. We can delve deeper into that and look at things like ethnicity. One of the things that we've found recently, which we're going to do a paper on, hopefully, a poster on at NZSCIR, is looking at our population in terms of the differences between the two units. And so looking at things like ethnicity, which is on the next page, sorry, this is, bear with me. So we're looking at our primary group here in terms of ethnicity. You can see we're 55% European, 21% Māori, whereas if you were to look at the split between, sorry, I'm jumping around, I apologise. If you look at the Auckland Spinal unit, you'll see how that changes. So Auckland has a much stronger Māori and Pacific peoples population. You can see it makes up almost half between Māori and Pacific peoples, whereas if you were to look at the Build population, you'll see this dramatically change. So 70% European and 18% Māori, 6% Pacific peoples. So it's a very different population. So this is a really good way, you know, we've kind of, you know, anecdotally known that that was the case, but this gives numbers to it and allows us to then delve deeper into the differences. Yeah. So I think that's probably
there's a goodly number of questions which I think
good. Okay, all right, certainly.
great
Sorry, I haven't seen. So
okay, yeah. Thank you everyone for
tried to
putting in
answer
those questions.
Yeah, I tried to answer the simple ones or the quick ones on the chat, but yeah, the more complicated ones I thought we could discuss.
Yeah,
certainly.
I'm just wondering, do you want to stop sharing, Tracey, and then we can
Totally
see?
can.
Yeah, and then
Yep.
but you can share again if you'd like to.
Yes.
And feel free to what's the word? Show your faces again and unmute yourself to contribute to the questions. So because what I might do is start going through them in a linear manner. So Debbie, you asked about the rate of opt-in versus declines, and Greta answered that. Any other questions further about that? Oh, you're muted.
It was just great to get an indication of what the kind of relative rates are, and so that's really helpful. Thanks. I'm curious about the difference between the two units, why it's slightly higher in Christchurch, but
definitely the ethnic makeup. Yeah, definitely. Probably our lowest consent rate is in the Pacific peoples, and as you can see, we have a really high proportion up in Auckland. I think that's why.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I can share the consent if you would like to see. It does give reasons. We obviously had COVID in the middle of it as well, and during the COVID pandemic we only collected minimal data set because we were minimizing obviously interactions with patients, and so, and obviously Auckland was in lockdown longer than the rest of the country, so I was able to go and consent patients, whereas in Auckland they weren't. So there is those differences. Yeah,
it was interesting, isn't it, that behind these numbers there's lots of stories.
Absolutely, and generally speaking, numbers are numbers, aren't they? And you can make them say but it is really fascinating delving deeper in what people anecdotally have said and being able to back that up with numbers. So yeah, it's an interesting area. The consent thing is certainly an area we want to improve on, but in general, I'm just looking at the percentage. We sit about 60. Since 20. Hang on, get rid of those numbers. So since 2016, our consent rate's about 67%. And when I say consent rate, that's not people declining. That's people maybe not fitting our criteria for a full data set. So someone who comes in as a tourist is injured and then returned to their country of origin, they won't get a full data set collected. It's only a minimal data set. So there's several reasons. TBI, severe TBI, we won't collect a full data set on. Obviously those that decease in the acute phase, we don't collect a full data set on. So there's lots of reasons. Declining is one of, but is often not the major. Yeah.
Okay. And it probably just to add to that, and based on my knowledge, is that the return rates or the completion rates of the community data set is a lot lower.
It is, yes, you'll be right. we haven't got around to being able to work out very accurate return rate data yet. That's one of our projects. Yeah, but it is low. I would say it will probably be about 30%. So yeah, it is quite low.
Yeah. Sarah, have you got a follow-up question in relation to that? Feel free to ask away.
Sorry, bear with me. I'm on my phone trying to find the right button. Thanks, team. So one of the reasons I've joined is that to here today is I'm the national lead for the hip fracture registry, and I'm at Christchurch Tracey, at Burwood Tracey. So I actually thought this might be a good chance to kind of connect in terms of linking registries up. Agree that trying to get collect information after people leave the hospital is a huge challenge, and I could share with you some of the so we're a Trans-Tasman registry, and so the Australians got some funding this year to do some work on patient experience measures and things. But so as far as I understand it, you currently do a questionnaire. I guess just briefly, I'd be interested in knowing what your kind of thoughts are. For the hip fracture registry, we're obviously spread across 20 sites, not 2. Yes. And so many of our data collectors do a phone call at 3 months, and we get a very, very basic set of information there. Clearly it doesn't really go enough to being able to fulfill patient reported outcomes at all, but yeah, interested in hearing briefly, and otherwise I think we should probably catch up.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in terms of our process, we tend to, on discharge, we ask them for an email if they're happy to get it via email questionnaire. The problem we have is that the questionnaire is quite cumbersome. It's a very long and not particularly part of the data point review is to look at our questionnaire, and also we're just changing the way and trying to get a bit more awareness that something will be coming and that it's expected, and being able to talk to people when they come back for reassessment, and those sorts of things, just to kind of highlight that something will be coming, and we'd be love to get information from you at that point. It's all patient reported outcomes. It's not things like dates of readmission or anything like that. It's purely patient reported. Canada have also got a similar low return rate, so it is an area of focus for us, but we've tried a massive push in Auckland where we had people phoning up to try and increase our return rate, but even that, putting hours and hours and hours of work in, didn't really make much difference in terms of the return rate, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, there must be, I'm sure there is a technological solution, so I'm sure we'll all get there at some point.
Yeah. Ours is an automated system, so if they've got an email in the system, it will get emailed out automatically at 18 months, 5 years, so forth. So that has been good, and that it's taken the work off us, but it's still, the return rate is, yeah.
Thank you.
All good. I look forward to catching up.
So there's another discussion that's gone on a little around the TBI data point, and Katie specifically sort of asking a bit more about that. Katie and Debbie responded. Is there anything further you want to ask at this point, Katie, or are you happy that you can follow up with Debbie if you are interested, or the?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yes, no, I was just interested because we know, so many of the spinal cord injury clients have TBI, and it never seems to be sort of acknowledged anywhere. So that would be really useful, even for stats and and clinical outcomes and all sorts. I feel it's a really useful.
It's an issue that's been in, as obviously Debbie's research shows. They looked at whether or not it was even recorded well, and it wasn't. So, and there's not a great amount that we can do as a registry if there's no accurate consistent way that it's being recorded. So in terms of us saying even a tick box to say yes, no to a TBI concussion isn't useful if it's not being recorded in the medical notes well anyway. So for us, we see this as a way of, you know, promoting, you know, a clinical change. So Debbie's well on that.
That's brilliant.
So it is exciting.
Yeah, I wasn't sure why we have never sort of pushed for a TBI moderate to severe registry. I don't know why that's never. So I think that might be a wee little soapbox campaign, Debbie, for the next few years.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, but it's something we should put to the TBI network, that they might be a good home for something like that.
Yeah,
if we included all the mild sort of we'd be completely overrun, but certainly something like moderate
with
to
the moderate
TBI.
severes. Yeah, the people that come out of the intensive units would be perfect, because we mooted it ages ago in terms for follow-up and checking on people and all sorts of, and you know, monitoring outcomes for ACC, and but it was never taken on board. So
now Emily raises a really great question about, is there any plans for the future to collect data in the paediatric population?
Oh,
I knew it was a good question.
It's a good question. So initially when we set up, we did approach Starship because technically we're an adult registry. So technically what we collect is anyone who's admitted to either of the units. You'll see on our dashboard that there were the occasional 0 to 15, a very, very small number. So those that get admitted to either unit that are deemed okay to cope with an adult environment. So they're usually 14/15-year-olds. We don't collect anything under that age. We have talked to Starship about collecting that data point, but they declined at that point. So there was talk of an Australasian paediatric SCI registry that was discussed at ANZSCIR last year. And I don't know that there's been any more movement on that as far as I'm aware. There was a delay in having those discussions, but it's certainly talked about. I don't think anything has actually concretely happened as far as I'm aware, and we won't be expanding because it's just the 2 adult units that we're using for the data collection as far as I'm aware. Would that be right, Greta? Am I? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there's an advocacy need though. Emily, are you working with the paediatric population?
Yeah, I work at the Wilson Centre, so we do all the pediatric
yes.
injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was, I'm just trying to think, it wasn't me that had those discussions, but there were discussions early on as to what kind of, we stuck with the 2 spinal services because they were the classed as the adult adult services. Yeah.
So Emily, I was involved in the spinal cord action plan evaluation, and I was evaluating the objective related to paediatric spinal cord injury. So if you want to reach out and have a discussion at any point, I'm very happy to have a chat.
Thank you.
Good job.
Now, Meg, you've been raising some lovely, encouraging yay and other things in relation to nationally available identifiable data sets. Is there anything you wanted to add to your comments on the chat?
Hi everyone. Obviously with Catwalk I come from a slightly different angle. We're all about funding research into a cure, the cure being the whole spectrum and the functional. And so I'm just really interested in how we can use this data to get more funding into the spinal cord injury community, not just our research cure, but the whole community. And we obviously come up against brick walls a lot because we haven't had enough data to show that there was a need, and equity was the big thing that kept coming back at us, which you have shown that there is a definite need and there are strong inequities. And so just wanting to figure out, and a few of you were at the symposium we did at the University of Auckland at the end of last year, and I know we're doing another one this year, which is being led by Darren, who's a researcher up there. So hopefully everyone on this will be interested in joining us for that, because what I think is crucial is all of us working together to so we can help get funding to the right areas.
Yeah.
That's our role in this. That's how we see our role, as helping with the funding for everyone, not just research, as I say. So I was really interested in, with the funding via ACC and the Ministry of Health, I remember this all coming up. Where did you start? Who are you starting with? Because that's the biggest problem, is there's not sort of one place to go. We've done Health Research Council, we've done ACC, we've done, and you sort of get thrown around. So,
if I can answer that, Greta, I suppose for us, we were just very lucky that it came under the ACC umbrella of the action plan. There was the whole destination policy that came into effect, and I think that went hand in hand in terms of showing the effectiveness of the destination policy, and us having the data to show that. So in terms of Ministry of Health, we've had we haven't had a huge amount of input from Ministry of Health. We did when we established the registry in terms of their input at that point, but since then it's really been under ACC. The registry coordinators are employed by both sites, so we're not under, we are employed by the DH, by Te Whatu Ora. But in terms of funding, I really don't know how. I mean, yeah, that's a tricky one, as Noelle you're well aware of. So I would hope that, yeah, I mean, our data is there if you wanted to, look at it in terms of annual reporting and those sorts of data points.
Yeah, sorry, and what I should have said is, so the data is great. Is there any way, and this might be something we have to chat about offline, that we can put a cost around that? Like every time you see someone's been readmitted, or pneumonia, pressure, how do we put some costs around that so that
if I could speak to that, me, one of the advantages of moving to being able to access identifiable data sets is you can then marry it with IDI data sets, etc., that are available around hospitalizations, access, use of primary healthcare services, etc., etc. So one of the sort of the next bits of work is looking at whether there's to make it easier to be able to link those data sets. So that becomes a very powerful tool in terms of health economics, and looking particularly at equitable, whether people are receiving equitable care and experiencing equitable outcomes over time. So that's a sort of a bigger piece of work, and potentially a research project in and of itself, really. Yeah. Look, I'm aware of the time, and I'm aware a lot of people are having to go. Gerben, I've not addressed any of your questions because they're so good, but they're real big.
Thank you.
We're happy for them to be emailed to us.
Absolutely.
And
Gerben, is there one that you particularly would love a response to right now, or?
Yes, I think the only one I really like is, I've worked with the U.S. Spinal Cord Injury Registry for many, many years, and it's been around since the 1970s. And I suspect that the data variable definitions are a little bit different.
Yes.
But yeah, and the time interval is a little bit different. Where do you see opportunities for linking up the data or coming up with comparisons and such?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I suppose one of the main reasons we went and looked at sharing with Canada, because they had the Canadians already had been going for about 10 years when we jumped on board, so they already had a 10-year data set, and Canada's quite similar to New Zealand as well in many ways. But yeah, I think that's the problem with registries. Everyone's inclusion criteria, and there's always a little bit of variation, which means that they're not necessarily comparable. But there are filters that we can use to improve that. In terms of, we've done paper, there's one paper, there's another paper coming in terms of comparisons between the Canadian and the New Zealand population, but we are talking quite small numbers compared to the States. So yeah, I'm all for being able to share with someone. If you want to make that suggestion, feel free. Because
sounds like a neat project.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be great to be able to do that kind of collaborative work.
Yeah, I think collaboration is really the key, because New Zealand's
absolutely.
numbers tend to be on the small side,
Yep.
given the small population. And now at least New Zealand has something to offer and has, and so it can be a partner with others, and then leveraging combined data is a great way to really, I think, get more mileage.
Power in numbers, yeah, absolutely.
And
Totally.
also too, you know, you get a chance to do some quality comparisons. When you look at rehospitalization rates, Auckland versus Christchurch, and adjusting for patient differences, and then comparing that with some other stuff internationally or with Canada, whatever the case may be. You can begin to see whether or not, you know, the standard of care is good, superb, or is found wanting. So I think those kind of comparisons are extremely useful in terms of quality improvement, and looking at things like, for example, are a lot of people readmitted for pressure sores in the first year, or first 18 months. I believe you have an 18-month window. Or what are the number one reason? What's the number 1 and 2 reason for readmission? You know, that kind of thing. And then what kind of interventions then are needed to limit those readmissions? I think these are the kinds of questions that one is then able to answer that heretofore could not have been answered.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. And I was going to channel Richard and finish with a challenge, a lay down, because he would say, if I was a person with spinal cord injury, what would I have seen change as a result of the registry being present? And I think that's kind of come back to the whole reason for this being here. It's about change for people who experience and live with the impacts of spinal cord injury. And so one of my thoughts is that maybe people will be more willing to contribute their data to a registry, in community follow-up, for instance, if they can see that their contributions really contributing to change and to improve services. So I'll close with a karakia. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o te tātou ariki, a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhina tāhitanga, ki te wairua tapu, aki, menei. Thank you so much, Greta and Tracey. Really appreciate you sharing. Thank you everyone for coming and for listening. And I'm pretty sure you'll have a lot of people following up. I've got a copy of the chat too, guys, so I'll be able to get back to you so you can follow up with people.
Yeah, that'll be great.
And this recording will be available on the Build Academy site. So if you think anyone else that you know would be interested in seeing it, feel free to direct them to that.
Fantastic.
Lovely to see you all.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Michelle.
much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Well done. I think
Just stopping the recording. I'll pop over.
okay, yep. Fantastic. Thank you.